I stood frozen in my midnight blue gown under the crystal chandelier of the Sinclair Winter Gala, the most prestigious event in Aspen's social calendar. Dozens of millionaires, celebrities, and media figures turned their eyes toward the stage as Nathaniel Sinclair, the revered tech tycoon and heir to a financial empire, raised his champagne glass. This year, he announced with a smile that sliced through me like ice. The Wells Legacy Fellowship will not be awarded to Diana Wells as previously expected. Instead, it will go to a young woman with fresher blood and bigger potential, Amelia Fox. Laughter rippled through the room as Amelia ascended the stage, her arm linking with Nathaniel's. Cameras flashed. I could hear my name whispered like an embarrassment. Isn't she the orphaned assistant or something? I thought she was being groomed for leadership. Guess not. My legs trembled. My hands were clenched at my sides. But I said nothing, because I knew something none of them did. A key rested inside my clutch. A key to the Sinclair vault, where hidden among financial records and antique ledgers, a sealed envelope bearing my mother's handwriting and a notarized will lay, dormant, waiting to be opened. In exactly 24 hours, the world would find out that the Wells legacy wasn't Nathaniel's to give, because I was the true Sinclair heir. 3 years before that humiliating night, I was just Diana Wells, a 25-year-old research assistant at Sinclair Holdings with an unremarkable life and a remarkable secret I didn't yet understand. My workspace was a glass cubicle on the 37th floor of the Sinclair Tower in downtown Aspen, where I analyzed investment patterns and prepared briefing materials for the executives who barely noticed me. Diana, I need the Henderson portfolio by 2, was about as personal as conversations got with most of them. I wasn't born into wealth or connections. My mother died when I was 13, pneumonia complicated by exhaustion, the doctors said, leaving me to bounce between foster homes across Colorado. My only inheritance was a worn leather notebook with her initials, RM, embossed on the cover, filled with cryptic notes I couldn't decipher. I kept it with me always, like a talisman. That was my life. Quiet, methodical, invisible. Until the day Nathaniel Sinclair stopped by my desk. You're the one who flagged the discrepancy in the Meridian acquisition? He asked, leaning against my desk with casual entitlement, his tailored suit probably worth 3 months of my salary. I nodded, trying not to show how my heart raced at being noticed by the heir to the Sinclair fortune. At 34, Nathaniel was already a legend in financial circles. Harvard Business School, successful tech ventures, and the presumptive next CEO of Sinclair Holdings, a $9 billion investment empire founded by his grandfather. Impressive work, he said, flipping through my analysis. Most people wouldn't have caught that algorithmic anomaly. It wasn't difficult, I replied. The pattern was there if you knew where to look. His eyebrows raised slightly. And you knew where to look. That was the beginning. Within weeks, I was pulled into strategy meetings where my analyses were actually heard. Nathaniel began mentoring me personally, calling me a breath of fresh air in a stagnant corporate culture. Soon, the whispers started. Diana Wells was being groomed for leadership, perhaps even being considered as Nathaniel's successor in the Wells Legacy Fund, a prestigious $50 million innovation grant awarded every 5 years to promising leaders within the company. You don't just belong in this world, Diana, Nathaniel told me one evening as we worked late, the city lights twinkling below his corner office. You elevate it. I almost believed him. Almost believed I had finally found my place. My family, even. The Sinclairs began including me in private events. Edward Sinclair, the aging patriarch, and Nathaniel's father seemed particularly taken with me, often studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You remind me of someone, he said once, then turned away before I could ask who. It was during this time that I met Rosalind Moore, an elderly legal advisor who had retired from Sinclair Holdings years ago. She approached me at a company charity auction, her gray eyes sharp, with intelligence. You're Diana Wells, she said. Not a question. Yes, I replied, surprised. Have we met? No, but I knew your mother. She pressed something into my palm, a business card with a cabin address scrawled on the back. When you're ready to know the truth, come find me. I kept the card but didn't call. My life was finally taking shape. I had Nathaniel's favor, a growing reputation, and for the first time, hope for a future beyond survival. Then came Amelia Fox. She arrived as a branding consultant 6 months before the Winter Gala, tall, blonde, and impossibly confident. From day one, she positioned herself close to Nathaniel. Her laugh was always the loudest at his jokes. Her ideas, many suspiciously similar to mine, were presented with theatrical flair that captivated boardrooms. I first noticed the shift when my access to executive decisions became temporarily restricted. Just streamlining communication channels, Nathaniel explained, not quite meeting my eyes. My proposals began appearing in presentations as team concepts, with Amelia's name prominently featured. Invitations to strategic meetings dwindled. Nathaniel's mentorship sessions were repeatedly rescheduled, then canceled altogether. And the whispers changed. Diana's too analytical, too cold to lead. Maybe she's not the fit Nathaniel thought. Amelia understands the big picture better. I confronted Nathaniel after a particularly brutal meeting where my year-long research project was presented as Amelia's brainchild. "What's happening?" I asked him directly. "Have I done something wrong?" "Of course not," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But leadership isn't just about analysis, Diana. It's about presence, connection. Amelia has a certain energy that inspires people." The subtext was clear. I didn't inspire. I was a tool, not a leader. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out my mother's notebook again. The cryptic references suddenly seemed worth decoding. Sinclair, 312. Vault access after trust is signed. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number on Rosalind Moore's card. "I'm ready to know the truth," I told her. 3 days later, I drove to her cabin outside Aspen. As snow began to fall, Rosalind served tea and unraveled the secret that would change everything. "Your mother wasn't Rebecca Wells," she said quietly. "She was Rosemary Moore, my niece. And she wasn't just a secretary at Sinclair Holdings. She was Edward Sinclair's daughter." The teacup nearly slipped from my fingers. "That's impossible." "It's not only possible, it's documented." Rosalind slid a faded photograph across the table. A young woman with my eyes, standing beside a younger Edward Sinclair. "Your grandfather had an affair with my sister during his first marriage. When she died in childbirth, he took Rosemary in, but kept her parentage secret to protect his public image and first family. But that would make me Nathaniel's cousin, and legally next in line to inherit Edward's personal trust if anything happens to Edward himself." My mind reeled. Why hasn't anyone told me? Rosalind's smile was sad. "Because power doesn't share itself." "Willingly, Diana. Edward recognized Rosemary privately, but never publicly. When she died, the Sinclairs lost track of you in the foster system, perhaps deliberately. And Nathaniel? Does he know?" "He found out recently. Edward's health is failing and the trust matures soon. That's why they've been grooming you, to keep you close, to assess whether you'd be a threat. And now they're pushing me." "Out," I whispered, the betrayal burning like acid. "Because you proved yourself too competent," Rosalind confirmed. "Too much your mother's daughter." Snow fell steadily outside Rosalind's cabin as my world tilted on its axis. I was not Diana Wells. Orphaned nobody. I was Diana Moore Sinclair, the granddaughter of Edward Sinclair and rightful heir to part of his fortune. "There's more." "Rosalind, I," said, retrieving a worn wooden box from her bedroom. "Your mother left this with me before she died. She said you'd need it someday." Inside was a velvet pouch containing a brass key with ornate engravings. "It opens Vault 312 at Sinclair Private Banking," Rosalind explained. "That's where Edward kept the original trust documents and his acknowledgement of your mother's parentage." I ran my finger along the key's teeth. Why didn't my mother use this herself? The trust has conditions. It only matures when Edward turns 80 or dies, whichever comes first. Rosalind's expression turned grim. "His birthday is tomorrow, Diana. The day after the winter gala." Suddenly, Nathaniel's rush to publicly sideline me made perfect sense. He knew what was coming and was preemptively destroying my credibility. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "I was Edward's legal advisor for 30 years. I helped draft that trust. And I promised your mother I would tell you the truth when the time came." She squeezed my hand. "That time is now." The following weeks were the hardest of my life. At work, I endured Amelia's thinly veiled contempt and Nathaniel's calculated distance. I continued, performing my duties flawlessly while watching my achievements be attributed to others. Each morning, I reminded myself, just until the trust matures. I used my lunch breaks to prepare. With Rosalind's guidance, I consulted a discreet attorney who confirmed the legal standing of my claim. I documented every instance of credit stolen, every meeting I was excluded from. I recorded conversations where executives inadvertently revealed they knew my true identity. "Diana seems so much like Edward sometimes," one board member had remarked to Nathaniel, not realizing I was within earshot. A coincidence, Nathaniel had replied sharply. Nothing more. The night of the winter gala arrived with a crystalline Colorado frost. The Sinclair mansion glittered with imported decorations and the jewelry of 400 elite guests. I wore midnight blue, my mother's favorite color, according to Rosalind, and a single pearl pendant that had belonged to her. I knew what was coming. Rosalind had warned me. He'll try to humiliate you publicly, to discredit you before the truth comes out. Still, hearing Nathaniel announce Amelia as the recipient of the Wells Legacy Fellowship, a fellowship named for my own family, sent ice through my veins. Instead, it will go to a young woman with fresher blood and bigger potential, Amelia Fox. Amelia ascended the stage in a crimson gown, her triumphant smile directed at me through the crowd. The cameras flashed. The applause swelled. I felt the weight of judgmental stares and pitying glances. Isn't she the orphaned assistant or something? Whispered a woman near me. I thought she was being groomed for leadership. Guess not, her companion replied. My hands trembled, but I kept my expression neutral. The key to Vault 312 was safely tucked inside my clutch, pressed against my palm like a promise. Nathaniel raised his glass higher. Diana's work has been appreciated, he added with condescending magnanimity. But this new chapter demands a fresh face. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally? The legacy born in my blood was being gifted to a woman who'd never worked late nights, never sacrificed, never belonged. Our eyes met across the crowded room. His held a warning. Know your place. Mine held a secret. I already do. When he finished his speech, I did something that clearly unsettled him. I smiled, raised my champagne glass in silent acknowledgement, and took a deliberate sip, because while they celebrated tonight, tomorrow belonged to me. Edward Sinclair himself approached me later, leaning heavily on his cane. At 80, his once commanding presence had diminished, but his eyes, my eyes, remained sharp. You look just like her, he said quietly. Like who? I asked, though we both knew. Your mother was extraordinary, he continued, ignoring my question. Brilliant, determined. She never wanted my money, only my acknowledgement. His gaze drifted to Nathaniel across the room. I failed her in that. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. He nodded, as if accepting my judgment. The vault opens tomorrow, Diana. Use what you find wisely. Before I could respond, Nathaniel appeared at his father's side, smoothly inserting himself between us. Father, the Goldmans are looking for you, he said, guiding Edward away while giving me a warning glance. As they walked away, I heard Edward say, She has Rosemary's strength, and Nathaniel's reply, She has nothing, Father, nothing at all. He was wrong. I had the truth, and after tomorrow, everyone would know it. Morning dawned crisp and clear over Aspen, the sunlight glinting off fresh snow as I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal pencil skirt, ivory blouse, and my mother's pearl pendant. Today wasn't about the humiliation of last night. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Rosalind met me outside Sinclair Private Banking at precisely 9 a.m. Her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her spine straight despite her 70 years. Are you ready? She asked, studying my face. I've been ready my whole life, I replied. I just didn't know it. The bank manager greeted us with practiced deference. Rosalind Moore still commanded respect in financial circles, and led us to the private vault section. The air was cooler here, the lighting subdued, emphasizing the gravitas of old money and older secrets. Vault 312, as I requested, he announced, gesturing to an elegant brass door embedded in the marble wall. I'll give you privacy. My hand didn't tremble as I inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click, and the heavy door swung open silently. Inside, the vault was smaller than I'd imagined, perhaps 10 feet square, with built-in drawers and shelves containing leather-bound ledgers and document boxes. In the center stood a polished mahogany table with a single envelope placed precisely in the middle. My name was written across it in elegant script. Diana Rosemary Moore Sinclair. He used your full name, Rosalind observed quietly. That's significant for legal purposes. I broke the wax seal and removed several documents, spreading them carefully on the table. The first was a letter, handwritten, on Sinclair Holdings' letterhead. My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, then you have found your way back to your rightful place despite my failures. I should have acknowledged you publicly years ago, but fear and pride kept me silent. Weaknesses I hope you will forgive in time. Enclosed, you will find 3 documents of importance. First, my notarized acknowledgement of you as my legitimate granddaughter, daughter of Rosemary Moore Sinclair. Second, the updated trust designating you as primary beneficiary to the Wells Legacy Fund and 30% shareholder in Sinclair Holdings, effective upon my 80th birthday. Third, documentation of certain financial irregularities I have uncovered in Nathaniel's management. I had hoped he would correct these himself, but integrity, it seems, cannot be inherited. The choice of how to proceed is yours. You have more strength than I ever did. Your grandfather, Edward Sinclair. I read it twice, then passed it to Rosalind, whose expression remained impassive. Standard Edward, she murmured, attempting deathbed atonement. The acknowledgement was indeed notarized, dated 3 years earlier, around the time Nathaniel had first discovered me. The trust documentation was extensive, with multiple amendments culminating in the final version naming me as beneficiary. But it was the third document that made my blood run cold. This is serious, Rosalind said, examining the financial records. Nathaniel has been transferring shares from family trusts into shell companies, and these consulting invoices, she pointed to a series of signatures. Amelia Fox, for marketing campaigns that never existed. They're embezzling, I whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than I'd expected. Both of them. Not just embezzling, they're dismantling Edward's legacy, selling off the ethical investment divisions, doubling down on fossil fuels and predatory lending. Rosalind's jaw tightened. Everything your mother fought to build within. The company. A soft knock interrupted us. The bank manager stood in the doorway, his expression grave. Ms. Wells, there's a situation in the lobby. Mr. Nathaniel Sinclair is demanding access to this vault. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. Does he have authorization? No, the manager confirmed. Only you and Mr. Edward Sinclair are listed on the access records. Then I'm afraid he'll have to wait, I replied. We have legal business to complete. The manager hesitated. He's quite insistent. Perhaps if you spoke with him. That won't be necessary, Rosalind interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. We'll need another hour, and we'll require 2 witnesses from your legal department for document verification. Standard procedure. Recognizing an authority greater than wealth, the manager nodded and withdrew. Rosalind turned to me, her eyes steel. We need to move quickly. Nathaniel wouldn't be here unless he knows what's happening. For the next 45 minutes, we worked methodically, photographing documents, making certified copies with the bank's notary, and organizing everything into a legal brief. When we finally emerged, Nathaniel was pacing the lobby, Amelia hovering anxiously at his side, his face normally composed for the public, contorted with barely contained rage when he saw me. Diana, what an unexpected surprise. Is it? I asked calmly. I would have thought you'd be expecting me today of all days. His eyes darted to the document case in my hand, then to Rosalind. Ms. Moore, I wasn't aware you still had connections to Sinclair Holdings. I have connections to justice, Mr. Sinclair, she replied evenly. Something you might consider cultivating. Amelia stepped forward, her smile brittle. Diana, sweetie, we were worried when you left so abruptly last night. Are you feeling well? The false concern might have wounded me yesterday. Today, it was merely pathetic. I'm feeling exceptionally clear-headed. Amelia, and you? Her smile faltered. Nathaniel moved closer, lowering his voice. Whatever you think you've found, it won't matter. No one will believe you over me. I met his gaze steadily. It's not about belief anymore. It's about documented fact. Would you like to know what your father had to say about your creative accounting? The color drained from his face. My father is an old man. With dementia. His accusations are meaningless. Interesting theory, I replied. Perhaps you'd like to present it at tomorrow's board meeting. I've called an emergency session as a 30% shareholder. That's impossible, he hissed. You're nothing. A nobody. I smiled then, feeling a strange calm. I'm Diana Moore Sinclair, and I'm exactly who I've always been. I gestured to the exit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a legacy to reclaim. As Rosalind and I walked past them toward the sunlight beyond the bank's heavy doors, I heard Amelia whisper frantically, What does she mean, 30%? And Nathaniel's grim reply, It means we're screwed. Outside, I took my first deep breath as my true self. The air tasted different somehow, clearer, filled with possibility. What? Now? Rosalind asked as we reached her car. I gazed back at the bank, where Nathaniel and Amelia were emerging, their faces masks of controlled panic as they spotted nearby photographers. The financial press, it seemed, had caught wind of something big happening at Sinclair Private Banking. Now, I said, we let the truth do its work. The Sinclair Holdings boardroom occupied the entire top floor of their downtown headquarters, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of snow-capped mountains. I had been here before, of course, standing unobtrusively in corners, presenting data when instructed, always the assistant, never the decision-maker. Today, I entered as a Sinclair. The emergency board meeting had been called for 10 a.m., and by 9:45, the room was already filled with confused executives and legal representatives. Nathaniel sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. Amelia was conspicuously absent. When Edward Sinclair entered, the room fell silent. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were clear and focused. He nodded slightly in my direction before taking his seat to Nathaniel's right. "What's this about, Father?" Nathaniel asked, his voice carrying the practiced concern of a dutiful son. "You should be resting on your birthday." Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Some matters can't wait, Nathaniel. Not even for rest." At precisely 10 a.m., Rosalind Moore entered, followed by two representatives from the SEC and the bank's head of compliance. Murmurs rippled through the room as she took her place beside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "Thank you for attending on such short notice. I've called this meeting to address 3 critical matters affecting the future of Sinclair Holdings." Nathaniel leaned forward. "You have no authority to call a board meeting, Diana. You're an assistant." "Actually," Rosalind interjected, sliding copies of the trust documentation down the table, "Ms. Sinclair has every authority. As of midnight last night, she is a 30% shareholder in this company and primary trustee of the Wells Legacy Fund." The room erupted in confused questions. One board member, Victoria Chen, raised her hand sharply. "What is the meaning of this? Who is Ms. Sinclair?" I stepped forward. "I am Diana Moore Sinclair, granddaughter of Edward Sinclair and daughter of Rosemary Moore Sinclair. My identity and inheritance have been legally verified and documented." Nathaniel laughed, though the sound held no humor. "This is absurd. A desperate play for attention from a disgruntled employee." "Is it absurd, Nathaniel?" Edward's quiet voice cut through the chaos. Tell them how you've known about Diana for 3 years, how you brought her into the company to keep her close while you assessed the threat she posed." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathaniel's facade cracked just slightly, enough for everyone to see the truth. "Mr. Sinclair," Victoria addressed Edward directly, "are you confirming that Ms. Wells is your granddaughter?" "I am, Edward, I replied firmly, "and I deeply regret not acknowledging her sooner. My notarized statement to that effect is included in your packets." Nathaniel slammed his hand on the table. "This changes nothing. I've run this company for 5 years. I've tripled our profits." "By what methods?" I asked, signaling Rosalind to distribute the second set of documents. Perhaps the board would be interested in reviewing these financial records. They show systematic transfers from family trusts to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The SEC representatives leaned forward with sudden interest. "And these," I continued, passing out a third packet, "are invoices for consulting services that never occurred, signed by both Nathaniel Sinclair and Amelia Fox." The board members flipped through the documents with growing alarm. Victoria Chen's expression hardened as she examined the evidence. "These are serious allegations," she said finally. "If accurate, they constitute fraud and breach of fiduciary duty." "They're fabrications," Nathaniel insisted, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. "Diana has manipulated these documents out of spite because she lost a fellowship to someone more qualified." I smiled then, feeling oddly calm. "The Wells Legacy Fellowship, named for my family, ironically enough, was never yours to give, Nathaniel. And as for qualification," I turned to the board, "I didn't come here seeking revenge. I came seeking restoration of my identity, of my mother's legacy, and of this company's ethical foundation." For the next hour, we methodically presented the evidence. The SEC representatives confirmed they had already begun an investigation based on whistleblower reports. Reports I later learned that Edward himself had filed months ago. Throughout it all, Nathaniel's composure deteriorated. When the board called a recess to confer privately, he cornered me near the water cooler. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You're nothing but a charity. Case playing at being an heiress. This company will eat you alive." I met his gaze steadily. I'm not playing at anything, Nathaniel. I'm exactly who I've always been. The person who caught the meridian discrepancy, who built the Asian market analysis model, who designed the ethical investment framework you've been dismantling. The only difference is now I have the power to protect what matters. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that I wasn't the naive assistant he'd thought he could manipulate and discard. The board will never accept you, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. They already have, I replied simply. The question is, what will they do about you? When the meeting reconvened, the answer became clear. Victoria Chen, as lead independent director, took control of the proceedings. In light of the evidence presented, she announced, the board has voted to suspend Nathaniel Sinclair from all operational duties pending a full investigation. We have also frozen the assets of the consulting firm owned by Amelia Fox. Nathaniel stood abruptly. This is temporary. When the investigation clears me? If the investigation clears you? Edward interrupted, his voice weary but firm. Truth has a way of emerging, son, something you might have learned from Diana. As the meeting concluded, board members approached me one by one, some curious, some cautious, all reassessing who I was and what I represented. Victoria Chen lingered last. The Wells Legacy Fund, she said thoughtfully. What are your plans for it? I had considered this. Questioned throughout the sleepless night after the gala. It will become Wells Futures, I told her. An innovation fund focused on sustainable technology and ethical finance, the principles my mother valued. She nodded slowly. Not taking Nathaniel's position, then? No, I replied. I don't want his seat. I'm creating my own. As the boardroom emptied, I found myself alone with Edward. He looked smaller somehow. The weight of decades of secrets finally lifted from his shoulders. I failed your mother, he said quietly. And I failed you. Yes, I agreed, because there was no point denying it. But that's the past now. He studied my face. His eyes, my eyes. What will you do with Nathaniel? It was the question I had struggled with most. Revenge would be simple. Destruction, easy. I'm going to let justice take its course, I said finally. The legal system will address the fraud. As for Sinclair Holdings, that depends on him. If he can make amends, demonstrate integrity. Edward nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. Second chances were possible, but they had to be earned. You are so like her, he murmured. Rosemary always believed in redemption. As I left the boardroom, stepping into the elevator that would take me down to a world forever changed, I realized I felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I had honored my mother's memory in the way that mattered most, with truth, with dignity, and with the choice to rise above rather than descend into bitterness. The legacy I had claimed wasn't about money or power. It was about integrity. And that, unlike the Sinclair fortune, was something I had built entirely on my own. The news broke like a winter storm, sudden, fierce, and transformative. By evening, financial networks ran breaking headlines. Sinclair heir suspended amid fraud allegations, and unknown granddaughter claims stake in Sinclair empire. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, journalists, and suddenly interested connections who had barely acknowledged me a week earlier. I ignored them all, retreating to my modest apartment where the contrast between my life and my new reality felt most acute. The same faded couch where I'd spent nights studying financial reports was now where I sat watching my name scroll across television screens. The kitchen table where I'd eaten. Countless solitary meals now held documents worth billions. A knock at my door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Jacob Reynolds, Sinclair Holdings head of communications, and one of the few executives who had always treated me with genuine respect. I know you're in there, Diana, he called. I come bearing pizza and zero ulterior motives. I opened the door reluctantly. Jacob stood holding a large pizza box and a bottle of champagne, his tie loosened and his expression sympathetic. Figured you might not want to venture out tonight, he said. The press is camping outside your building. How did you get past them? Service entrance. I know people. He gestured with the pizza. Can I come in? This is getting heavy, and I promise I'm not here to pump you for information or convince you to issue a statement. I stepped aside, allowing him into my small living space. Jacob had always been different from the other executives. Less polished, more authentic. At 42, with salt and pepper hair and perpetually rumpled suits, he operated on the fringes of Sinclair's corporate culture while somehow remaining essential to its function. Nice place, he commented, setting the food. on my coffee table. Buried or normal. Not what you'd expect from a secret heiress? I asked dryly. Honestly, it's exactly what I'd expect from you. He glanced around at my bookshelves, the framed botanical prints, the conspicuous absence of luxury. You were never in it for the trappings. I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. I wasn't in it for anything except doing good work. I know. He handed me a slice of pizza on a napkin. That's why you'll survive this, and why Nathaniel won't. We ate in companionable silence for a while. The television muted but still flashing images of Sinclair Tower, Nathaniel's official portrait, and occasionally an old photo of my mother that someone had unearthed from company archives. They're calling her the secret Sinclair, Jacob noted, nodding toward the screen. Your mother. It's becoming quite the society scandal. She would have hated that, I said quietly. She never wanted to be a Sinclair. She just wanted to be acknowledged as herself. And you? What do you want? I considered the question carefully. Justice. Not revenge. Justice. For her, for the shareholders Nathaniel defrauded, for the employees whose pension funds he raided. Jacob studied me with interest. That's a fine line to walk. It's the only line worth walking. I set down my pizza, appetite gone. The board wants me to give a press conference tomorrow. To establish narrative control, they said. Sounds like Victoria Chen. It was. He leaned back, considering. And you don't want to do it. I don't want to be a spectacle. I don't want my mother's life, or mine, reduced to sound bites and society gossip. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said, May I offer some professional advice? Not as Sinclair's communications director, but as someone who's navigated a few PR hurricanes? I nodded. The story will be told with or without your input. If you don't speak, others will speak for you, including Nathaniel, who's probably crafting his counter-narrative right now. The thought sent a chill through me. What would you do? I'd reclaim the narrative. Make one clear, dignified statement that establishes who you are and what you stand for. Then step back and let your actions speak louder than any press release. I considered his words, recognizing their wisdom. Will you help me write it? Of course, he said, then added with a slight smile. Though, from what I've seen today, you don't need much help finding your voice. We worked for the next hour, crafting a statement that was neither apologetic nor vindictive, simply truthful. When we finished, Jacob read it aloud, his professional cadence giving the words added weight. It's perfect, I said when he finished. Thank you. Thank me by staying true to this version of yourself, he replied, folding the paper and placing it in my hands. The boardroom is going to try to change you. Don't let it. After he left, I stood at my window, watching snow begin to fall over the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosalind. CNN wants an exclusive. Offered $100K to charity of your choice. Thoughts? The Diana Wells of a week ago would have been astounded by such an offer. Diana Sinclair understood it was just the beginning of a world that would constantly try to commodify her story. I texted back. No exclusives. One statement, all outlets equal access. Her response came quickly. Wise choice. BTW. Edward asking to meet tomorrow. Private. I stared at the message, conflicted. Edward Sinclair was many things. My grandfather, a failed father, a corporate titan with a tarnished legacy. What could he possibly say now that would matter? Yet something in me, perhaps my mother's voice, preserved in memory, whispered that reconciliation, even imperfect, had value. Tell him 11 a.m. at Rosalind's cabin, I replied. Neutral ground, away from corporate politics and press scrutiny. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake thinking of my mother, a woman, strong enough to raise me alone while carrying the weight of unacknowledged truths. Had she looked at me as a baby and seen Edward's eyes staring back? Had she hoped I would someday reclaim what was rightfully ours? Or had she simply wanted me to live unburdened by Sinclair complications? I would never know. But I could honor her by moving forward with integrity. Morning brought fresh snow and renewed media frenzy. Photographers had indeed staked out my building, forcing me to exit through the service entrance just as Jacob had done. My regular coffee shop was suddenly filled with strangers hoping for a glimpse of the Sinclair heiress, prompting me to leave without ordering. The drive to Rosalind's cabin provided welcome solitude. As city streets gave way to mountain roads, I felt the knot in my chest gradually loosen. Whatever happened with Edward, whatever challenges lay ahead at Sinclair Holdings, I would face them as myself. Neither the invisible assistant nor the sudden heiress, but simply Diana, with my mother's strength and my own hard-won wisdom. Edward's black town car was already parked outside the cabin when I arrived. Inside, Rosalind had prepared tea and then tactfully made herself scarce, leaving my grandfather seated alone by the fireplace, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "Diana," he said as I entered, attempting to rise. "Please, stay seated," I told him, taking the chair opposite his. Between us, steam rose from the teacups like unspoken words seeking form. "I'm not sure where to begin," he admitted after a long pause. "The beginning might help," I suggested, not unkindly. He nodded, gathering himself. "I met your grandmother, my first wife, at university. Our marriage was conventional, appropriate. 2 years later, I met your grandmother Elaine at a conference in London. She was brilliant, challenging, everything Catherine wasn't." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Our affair lasted nearly 5 years. When she became pregnant with your mother, I panicked." "You abandoned her," I said flatly. "Yes," he acknowledged, his voice heavy with regret. "The worst mistake of my life. When Elaine died in childbirth, I brought Rosemary to America, created a new identity for her, and placed her with a trusted employee's family. I told myself I was protecting her from scandal. You were protecting yourself," I corrected. "Yes," he agreed again. "I was a coward. But I watched over her from a distance, funded her education. When she was old enough, I brought her into Sinclair Holdings. Not as my daughter, but as an exceptionally talented young woman who earned her position." "Did she know who you were?" "Eventually. She confronted me when she was 26, about your age now. She had pieced it together, from company records and old photographs." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She was formidable, demanded nothing for herself but insisted I establish a trust for you, her future child. That became the Wells Legacy Fund." "Why Wells?" "H.G. Wells was her favorite author. She appreciated the irony, a name meaning spring or source for a legacy that would flow to the future. A detail so small yet so revealing. Another piece of my mother returned to me." "And after she died?" I asked. Edward's face fell. "I lost track of you in the system. Perhaps deliberately at first. Grief makes cowards of us all. By the time I truly began searching, years had passed. Until Nathaniel found me," I concluded. "Yes. He discovered the trust provisions while reviewing succession plans. When your analysis of the Meridian deal crossed his desk, he recognized your potential immediately. The resemblance to your mother, in looks and intelligence, was unmistakable. So he brought me in to evaluate the threat." Edward nodded sadly. "And to control you, if possible. I allowed it because I was afraid of disrupting the empire I'd built. More cowardice." He met my eyes directly. "I have no right to ask your forgiveness, Diana, but I hope you might allow me the chance to know my granddaughter, in whatever time I have left." The request hung in the air between us. Simple, human, complicated by decades of secrets and harm. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Sinclair Tower's Grand Atrium. By noon, every major financial network had set up cameras and reporters from around the world jostled for position. Victoria Chen had arranged for me to enter through a private elevator, bypassing the circus below. "Remember," she instructed as we ascended, "this is about establishing continuity and confidence. The markets are watching. Investors are nervous." "I understand," I replied. The statement Jacob and I had crafted was folded in my pocket, its edges soft from repeated handling. "And your personal history with Nathaniel. Keep it professional. No accusations beyond what's in the official investigation." I turned to her, one eyebrow raised. "Do I strike you as someone prone to emotional outbursts, Ms. Chen?" Her expression softened slightly. "No. That's precisely why the board is relieved you're the one holding 30% of our shares." She hesitated, then added, "Your mother was the same way. Formidable but controlled. You knew her?" "Early in my career, she championed the ethical investment division I now oversee." Another connection, another thread woven back into the tapestry of my mother's life. The elevator doors opened onto a private anteroom where Jacob waited, along with Sinclair's legal team and several board members. "Ready?" Jacob asked quietly. I nodded, though my heart raced. The statement in my pocket suddenly seemed inadequate for the moment's magnitude. 2 minutes, a production assistant called. I stepped away from the group, needing a moment alone. Near the window overlooking the atrium below, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. What would my mother do in this moment? What would honor her legacy while remaining true to myself? The memory of our conversation at Rosalind's cabin echoed in my mind. Edward had asked for a chance to know me. I hadn't given him an answer, not in words. But as we parted, I had placed my hand briefly over his and said, "Tomorrow is a new day." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was an opening, a recognition that moving forward required neither forgetting the past nor remaining trapped by it. Now, facing the press and the public unveiling of my identity, I needed that same wisdom. This wasn't about revenge against Nathaniel or claiming the Sinclair name as a trophy. It was about honoring truth, establishing justice, and creating something meaningful from the broken pieces of the past. I removed the prepared statement from my pocket, read it once more, then deliberately folded it and placed it back. The words were good, but they weren't enough. This moment called for something more authentic. "It's time," Jacob said, appearing at my side. I nodded, smoothing my simple navy dress. Professional, understated, entirely my own choice rather than the designer outfit Victoria had suggested. The lights of the atrium were blinding as I stepped to the ice. Podium. Cameras clicked rapidly, microphones thrust forward. Faces both curious and calculating stared up at me. I saw Rosalind standing unobtrusively near the back, her presence a silent affirmation. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "My name is Diana Moore Sinclair. Until recently, most of you knew me, if you knew me at all, as Diana Wells, a research assistant at Sinclair Holdings." I paused, letting the reality of my dual identity settle over the room. Yesterday, documents were unsealed revealing that I am the granddaughter of Edward Sinclair and the daughter of Rosemary Moore Sinclair. These documents also established my legal standing as a significant shareholder in Sinclair Holdings and trustee of the Wells Legacy Fund. Cameras flashed, more intensely. I continued, setting aside my prepared remarks to speak from the heart. "This revelation has been as sudden for me as it is for you. 3 years ago, I joined this company with one goal, to do meaningful work. That remains my goal today, despite the changed circumstances." I looked directly into the cameras, knowing my words would reach Nathaniel wherever he was watching. Concurrent with these revelations, evidence of financial improprieties within Sinclair Holdings has emerged. The board has taken appropriate action, suspending certain executives pending a full investigation. I support this decision and the commitment to transparency it represents. Victoria Chen nodded approvingly from the sidelines. "I want to address 3 questions I know are on your minds. First, who am I? I am the same person I have always been, committed to ethical business practices, sustainable investment, and the belief that financial power carries moral responsibility. Second, what do I want? Not revenge, not sensation, not even recognition. I want justice, for shareholders whose trust was violated, for employees whose security was compromised, and for a family legacy that deserves better stewardship." I took a breath, feeling the weight of the final question. Third, what happens now? As of this morning, I have established Wells Futures, an innovation fund focused on sustainable technology and ethical finance. This fund will operate independently from but in cooperation with Sinclair Holdings, carrying forward the vision my mother championed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This announcement hadn't been pre-approved by the board. Victoria's expression tightened, but she didn't intervene. "I will not be assuming an operational role within Sinclair Holdings at this time. My 30% stake will be voted in accordance with the ethical investment principles the company was founded upon, and which certain recent leadership decisions have abandoned." A reporter called out, "Are you referring to Nathaniel Sinclair's leadership?" I met the question directly. "I'm referring to any leadership that prioritizes short-term profit over long-term integrity. The investigation will determine specific accountability." Another shouted, "Is it true Nathaniel Sinclair deliberately sidelined you once he discovered your identity?" "I won't speculate on motivations," I replied. "The facts of my gradual exclusion from strategic decisions are documented and will be considered by investigators." "What about your relationship with Edward Sinclair?" a third voice asked. "Have you reconciled?" I paused, considering how to honor the complexity of that relationship without exposing private vulnerabilities. "Edward Sinclair and I are beginning a new chapter, with clear eyes about the past and cautious hope for the future. Beyond that, our relationship remains private." For the next 15 minutes, I fielded questions with composed precision, neither attacking Nathaniel nor absolving him, acknowledging the legitimate business concerns while refusing to feed the hunger for family scandal. Throughout, I maintained the dignity my mother would have expected, neither gloating in victory nor cowering in modesty. When Victoria finally signaled that time was up, I closed with words I hadn't planned, but that rose naturally from my heart. The Sinclair name appears on buildings and financial reports, but a true legacy isn't built of marble and money. It's built through integrity, purpose, and the courage to face difficult truths. That's the legacy I intend to honor, not just my grandfather's, but my mother's. A legacy that belongs to all of us who believe business can be both profitable and principled. As I stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in questions and camera flashes. Jacob appeared at my side, guiding me toward the private elevator. "That wasn't the statement we prepared," he noted, his expression unreadable. "No," I agreed. "It was better." A slight smile curved his lips. "Much better. Though Victoria might have a stroke about the Wells Futures announcement. She'll recover. It's been in the works since yesterday. The legal documents were finalized this morning." His eyebrows rose. "You've been busy." "I learned efficiency from the best corporate culture in America," I replied with gentle irony. As the elevator doors closed on the media frenzy, I felt a strange lightness. For 3 years, I had existed in the shadows of Sinclair Holdings, valuable for my skills but invisible as a person. Now I stood in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny, every word and gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Neither extreme defined me. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, in the quiet. Determination that had carried me through foster homes and corporate politics alike, in the resilience inherited from a mother who had faced her own impossible choices, in the clarity that came from finally knowing my full story. The real work was just beginning. 3 months passed in a blur of depositions, board meetings, and careful reconstruction. Spring arrived in Aspen, melting snow, revealing the green promise beneath. Similarly, as the legal investigations progressed, the true foundation of Sinclair Holdings emerged from beneath the corrupt accumulations of recent years. Nathaniel had not gone quietly. After his suspension, he launched a counter-narrative through carefully placed interviews and social media posts, portraying himself as the victim of corporate politics and family betrayal. He claimed Edward's advancing age had made him susceptible to manipulation, insinuating that Rosalind and I had orchestrated the entire situation. "It would be almost impressive if it weren't so predictable," Rosalind remarked one evening as we reviewed the latest legal briefings in her cabin. "He's following the classic playbook for disgraced executives." "Has it ever worked?" I asked. "Not when the evidence is this clear," she replied, tapping the stack of financial documents that continued to grow as forensic accountants traced the full extent of the embezzlement. The shell companies, the fraudulent consultancy fees, it's all there in black and white. Indeed, the investigation had uncovered far more than we initially realized. Nathaniel and Amelia's scheme had extended beyond simple embezzlement to include insider trading, tax evasion, and systemic dismantling of the company's ethical investment framework. The damages were estimated at over $300 million. What surprised me most was not the scope of the fraud, but the number of people who had suspected something was wrong yet remained silent. Junior analysts, mid-level managers, even some board members, all had noticed red flags, but feared the consequences of speaking up. This realization shaped my first major initiative through Wells Futures, a whistleblower protection and reward program that extended beyond legal requirements to include career development and transitional support. The announcement garnered significant positive press and, more importantly, began changing the culture of fear Nathaniel had cultivated. Meanwhile, Edward Sinclair and I established a cautious relationship. We met weekly for lunch in a quiet restaurant halfway between his mansion and my apartment. Our conversations were initially stilted, weighted with decades of absence and regret, but gradually expanded to include genuine exchanges about business philosophy, literature, and memories of my mother. She loved autumn best, he told me during one such lunch. Said it was the only season honest about change, beautiful precisely because it was temporary. These glimpses of my mother through his eyes were precious gifts, filling gaps in my understanding of the woman who had shaped me more through her absence than her presence. Edward's health remained fragile, but his mind stayed sharp. He began transferring his knowledge systematically, not just about Sinclair Holdings operations, but about the wider financial world he had navigated for 60 years. "I made terrible mistakes as a father and grandfather," he acknowledged one day as we reviewed historical investment patterns. "I can't change that, but I can ensure you have every advantage I can give you now." It wasn't forgiveness exactly that grew between us, more a mutual recognition that the future need not be constrained by the failures of the past. The legal proceedings against Nathaniel moved with the glacial pace typical of complex financial crimes. He remained free on bail, dividing his time between his attorney's offices and increasingly desperate attempts to shore up his reputation. I saw him only once during this period, unexpectedly encountering him at the memorial service for a retired Sinclair board member. He looked thinner, the confident swagger replaced by tightly controlled tension. When our eyes met across the church sanctuary, I nodded slightly, a simple acknowledgement of his presence, neither hostile nor friendly. After the service, he approached me in the vestibule. "You've won," he said without preamble. "Are you satisfied? This isn't about winning or losing, Nathaniel, isn't it?" His smile was bitter. The noble heiress reclaiming her birthright from the villainous cousin. It's practically Shakespearean. That's your narrative, not mine. I studied him, seeing past the anger to the fear beneath. The company will survive this. Whether you do depends on choices you still have time to make. He laughed sharply. "Dispensing wisdom now? You've been a Sinclair for 5 minutes. I've been a Sinclair my entire life," I corrected gently. "I just didn't know it, but I've always known who I am, Nathaniel. That's something money can't buy." Before he could respond, Jacob appeared at my side. "Diana, we should go. The reporters are getting restless outside." Nathaniel's eyes flickered between us, a new suspicion forming. "Interesting alliance." "Goodbye, Nathaniel," I said, turning away. "I hope you find your way." Jacob and I had indeed formed an unexpected alliance that was gradually evolving into something more. Our working relationship had begun with the press statement, but continued as he helped me navigate the treacherous waters of corporate politics and public scrutiny. Late nights reviewing media strategies had led to conversations about books, films, and eventually our personal histories. "You're not what I expected," he told me one evening as we shared takeout in my office after everyone else had gone home. "A secret heiress should be more dramatic?" I suggested with a smile. "More entitled," he clarified. "Power changes people, usually not for the better." "I haven't had it long enough to be corrupted yet," I joked, but we both knew the truth was more complicated. The same disciplined focus that had carried me through years of invisibility now served as armor against the distorting effects of sudden wealth and influence. Wells Futures took shape rapidly under my direction, attracting talented analysts and researchers committed to its mission of ethical innovation. We established headquarters in a renovated historic building downtown, deliberately separate from Sinclair Tower's imposing glass and steel. The fund's first major investment supported a breakthrough water purification technology developed by researchers at Colorado State University. When early field tests in drought-affected regions showed promising results, the ET validation was sweeter than any luxury my new wealth could have purchased. "Your mother would be proud," Rosalind told me at the project's launch event. "This is exactly the kind of work she believed in." 6 months after the revelations at Sinclair Private Banking, I received an unexpected visitor at Wells Futures. Amelia Fox, once resplendent in designer clothes and confidence, appeared in my reception area wearing a simple black suit and an expression of tightly controlled desperation. "5 minutes," she requested. "Please." Against my assistant's concerned advice, I agreed. In my office, Amelia remained standing, declining my offer of a seat. "I won't take much of your time, I just needed to," she faltered, then straightened her shoulders. "I came to apologize." Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this moment, genuine contrition had never featured. "I made choices," she continued when I didn't immediately respond. "Terrible choices, for reasons that seemed important at the time but now just feel hollow." "Why tell me this?" "Because facing you is harder than facing the prosecutors or the press. Because you were invisible to me, and that was unforgivable." Her composure cracked slightly. "I'm pleading guilty next week. Part of a deal. I'll serve time, but less than Nathaniel." "You're cooperating with the investigation?" She nodded, a flash of her old shrewdness returning. "Full disclosure. It was his plan from the beginning. He saw your name cross his desk 3 years ago and recognized it from trust documents he wasn't supposed to access. And you?" "I was ambitious, ruthless." She met my eyes directly. "Like you, but without your moral compass." The comparison startled me, but I recognized its partial truth. In different circumstances, with different choices, our positions might have been reversed. "I don't expect forgiveness," Amelia continued. "I just wanted you to know that whatever happens to me, I earned it. And you earned everything you've built here." She gestured to the office, the view, the evidence of Wells Futures' early success. As she turned to leave, I found my voice. "Amelia." She paused. "We all make choices," I said. What matters is what we do next. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Even Nathaniel? Even Nathaniel, I confirmed, though his path back will be considerably longer. After she left, I stood at my window overlooking the mountains, thinking about choices and consequences, about justice and mercy. The woman who had laughed as I was publicly humiliated had just shown more integrity than I would have believed possible. People could surprise you, including yourself. 1 year to the day after the Sinclair Winter Gala that had changed everything, I stood once again beneath crystal chandeliers, this time at the inaugural Wells Futures Innovation Awards. The venue was more modest than the Sinclair mansion, but the energy in the room was electric with possibility rather than privilege. Researchers, entrepreneurs, and community leaders mingled with investors and media. The traditional hierarchy of wealth and status had been deliberately disrupted. Tonight's VIPs were those creating solutions to pressing global challenges, regardless of their backgrounds or bank accounts. Quite a difference from last year, Jacob commented, appearing at my side with 2 champagne flutes. Now officially, my partner both professionally and personally, he had traded his corporate communications role for leadership of the Wells Foundation's public engagement division. Night and day, I agreed, accepting the champagne. Though I still hate public speaking. He laughed. You've gotten rather good at it for someone who hates it. Necessity is a powerful teacher. I scanned the room, noting with satisfaction the diversity of the crowd. Is Edward here yet? Just arrived. Victoria's helping him get settled at the front table. My relationship with my grandfather had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. After months of cautious reconnection, we had established a weekly tradition of Sunday dinners where business talk was prohibited. Instead, we discussed art, philosophy, and increasingly family history, the good and the bad, without defensive filters. Edward's health had stabilized with new treatments, granting him what his doctors called quality time. Perhaps a few years, rather than the months initially feared. He had embraced this reprieve by systematically addressing his legacy, both corporate and personal. Most significantly, he had publicly acknowledged my mother as his daughter and me as his granddaughter, holding a press conference where he stated plainly, I failed Rosemary in life. I will not fail her in history. The corporate fallout from Nathaniel's crimes had been substantial, but not catastrophic. With the fraud exposed and addressed, Sinclair Holdings began rebuilding under interim leadership. Edward and I used our combined voting power to install a reformed board with stronger ethics oversight and greater diversity. Nathaniel himself had finally accepted a plea deal 3 months ago, 5 years in federal prison, plus financial restitution. The sentence was lighter than many thought just, but it came with a complete admission of guilt and cooperation in ongoing investigations of broader industry corruption. I hadn't spoken to him since our encounter at the memorial service, but I had written a brief letter after his sentencing. The door to redemption remains open. The path is entirely your choice. Whether he would ever walk that path remained to be seen. Some wounds were too deep for simple healing, some betrayals too fundamental for conventional forgiveness. Yet I had learned that moving forward didn't require perfect resolution of the past, only honest acknowledgement and the will to choose differently. As the lights dimmed for the evening's program, I moved toward the stage, reviewing my remarks one last time. The inaugural Innovation Award would go to the water purification team, now expanding their work to 3 continents. The grant would accelerate their progress by years. Victoria Chen, who had become an unexpected ally in corporate reform, introduced me with genuine warmth. A woman who reminds us that true leadership isn't about titles or traditions, but about vision and values. Diana Moore Sinclair. The applause was generous as I took the podium. The faces before me represented a new beginning. Not just for me, but for what wealth and influence could accomplish when directed toward collective good rather than personal gain. Thank you for joining us tonight, I began. A year ago, I stood in a room not unlike this one, feeling invisible despite being in plain sight. Many of you have heard the story that followed, the revelations, the investigations, the changes at Sinclair Holdings. I paused, looking out at faces both familiar and new. But that's not why we're here tonight. We're here because even in the midst of that personal upheaval, I discovered something more important than reclaiming a family name. I discovered a purpose that had been waiting for me all along. The same purpose my mother championed years ago. Edward nodded slightly from his front row seat, his eyes bright with emotion. Wells Futures exists because innovation shouldn't be constrained by short-term thinking or narrow definitions of value. The brilliant minds we celebrate tonight prove that profit and purpose can align, that the best investments yield returns measured not just in dollars, but in lives improved and possibilities expanded. As I announced the award recipients and outlined the foundation's future commitments, I felt a quiet certainty that this, not the Sinclair name or fortune, was my true inheritance. My mother had planted these seeds long ago, perhaps knowing that someday I would nurture them to fruition. Later, as the celebration continued around us, Edward took my hand. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a small velvet box into my palm. Inside lay a delicate gold locket. When opened, it revealed a tiny photograph of my mother as a young woman, her smile capturing the same determined optimism I had tried to maintain through my own challenges. "She wore this until the day she confronted me about her parentage," Edward explained. "Afterward, she returned it to me, saying she no longer needed to carry her past around her neck." I traced the locket's outline with my finger. "And now? Now it's yours to decide. A reminder of where you came from, or simply a beautiful object with history. Either way, it belongs with you." As I fastened the locket around my neck, I felt the circle completing, not just of jewelry returned, but of, truth acknowledged and purpose reclaimed. The evening wound down gradually, guests departing with new connections and inspired ideas. Jacob and I walked the last few out, then stood in the emptied venue, champagne glasses abandoned on tables, program booklets scattered like confetti. "So," he said, his arm slipping around my waist, "was it everything you hoped?" I considered the question. Seriously. "It's a beginning. A good one. And Nathaniel? Amelia? The whole Sinclair drama?" "Part of the story, not the whole story." I leaned into his steady presence. "They tried to write me out of the narrative. I chose to write my own instead." Later that night, back in my apartment, still modest despite my changed circumstances, I sat at my desk and opened my mother's leather notebook. Among her cryptic notes and careful documentation, I had recently discovered a line written in a different ink, perhaps added in her final days. "For D, remember that legacies aren't inherited. They're built, and the strongest foundations are laid in silence, with truth as the cornerstone." I had lived those words without knowing them, building in silence while others underestimated me, holding to truth, when deception would have been easier. The Sinclair name would always be part of me now, acknowledged and integrated. But it was the Wells legacy, my mother's legacy of integrity and purpose, that would guide my future choices. They had tried to humiliate me before the world, but the world had watched me rise instead, not through vengeance or vindication, but through the quiet power of being. Exactly who I had always been, a woman who knew that real wealth wasn't kept in vaults, but in the courage to stand firmly in one's truth, even when standing alone. That was a legacy worth building.